Welcome to the PROUST Questionnaire.
35 questions giving us insight into what makes creative people tick.
Welcome to the PROUST Questionnaire. Today, Caroline and I are thrilled to talk to Christine Coulson, who published a book called Metropolitan Stories about some of the objects in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, where Christine has worked as a senior curator for over 25 years. This book tells the stories of objects that contain their own stories and histories. And Christine says in this interview, if you look really closely, if you stay in front of a painting or a work of art or a piece of furniture and just pay attention, its history will reveal itself to you. We hope you'll enjoy these 35 questions with Christine Coulson, the author of Metropolitan Stories, and that you'll like the show on the various social media channels on Instagram, YouTube, etc. Thank you so much for listening, and Caroline and I are thrilled to present this conversation with Christine Coulson to you today.
So hello, Christine Coulson. We're happy to have you on the PROUST Questionnaire.
Hi, Christine. How are you?
Very well.
So it's really a pleasure to have you and to have you on Zoom today. And I've greatly enjoyed as much as I've been able to read of Metropolitan Stories. So thank you, first of all, for opening this vast, immense treasure chest in a totally different way. I'd never actually thought about any of the artworks in that building and the way you make them come to life. Really beautiful.
Yeah, no, Chris, that your novel Metropolitan Stories is really one of my favorite things I've read in a very long time. I'm a huge fan of yours, and I'm thrilled you can be here. And it's a special day for the PROUST Questionnaire because today's Proust's birthday. So we didn't plan anything otherwise. And as we're always trying to remind our guests or would-be guests, the PROUST Questionnaire really has very little, if anything, to do with Proust. It's just these 35 questions that he made famous by answering them twice when he was a young man at the turn of the last century. So I think without further ado, thank you for being here. And Uli, are you going to kick us off today?
Yes, and the first question, Christine, is what is your idea of perfect happiness?
Perfect happiness. I think I'm quite radical in that I very much believe in happiness. Like I'm like a super happy person, and I find that very easily. But I'd say my happiest place is in the mode of writing. I'm also a writer who doesn't mind writing, who doesn't find pain in the process. And for me, perfect happiness is arriving at the perfectly pruned sentence.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you have this thing and it's unwieldy, and then you start chopping and editing and you find just the perfect combination of noun, verb, adjective, and it just sings. And to me, that is a kind of, I don't know, there's a real palpable feeling that comes from that I have to believe is happiness.
That's
one that often, and you have to earn it. But when it happens, and the process of doing it, it's almost like, I don't know, it's like doing the crossword puzzle or something. When I was writing for the Met, my last assignment for the Met, I was writing the labels for the new British galleries, which are devoted to 400 years of British art and design. And I had 75 words to describe each object and 200 words to describe each century.
Oh, God.
And and a lot went on from 1500 to 1900. So I would get my 200 words, and it has to be so tight, and you have to use, each word has to work for you. And there's nothing more satisfying than that kind of challenge.
Yeah. No, it's nice also to hear that described as a process that for you isn't painful. I think a lot of the writers that I know, including myself, enjoy those good moments when it all comes together, but it's all fraught with so much pain and torture and gnashing of teeth and wringing of hands. It's really, really fun to talk with a writer who enjoys the process. And I will say also, just as another kind of plug for Metropolitan Stories, that not only is it, as Uli was saying at the beginning, just a fascinating look at this amazing wonder chest of the Metropolitan Museum, but also it's so beautifully written. The sentences are each a joy. So you impart that pleasure to your readers for sure. And it's nice to know that you're getting some pleasure while you're producing that prose.
Well, it's interesting too, because sometimes I feel like I'm not quite legit because I don't hate it. While there's struggle and there's challenge and there's but I like all that. And so I sort of feel like because I'm not fraught enough, it's like you're not supposed to be getting so much pleasure.
Oh God. Yeah. Don't question it. Don't bring that jinx on yourself. Let's preserve you in that idyllic state. Turning to a quite different kind of question. What is your greatest fear?
Oh, my greatest fear is my children. I mean, something happening to them, yes, but almost more so something happening to me. So they would live without me, which is probably a little narcissistic, but it's like Donna Tartt, when she wrote The Goldfinch, I read that book and it's such a complicated thing. And I don't think it's flawless, but what I really grabbed onto was this idea of this mother raising this son and what happens to the son when she's removed from his life. And so I read that book as like, oh my God, this is what's going to happen if something happens to me. And so I have a real, I think it's probably an irrational feel. They're 13 years old now and they're probably just fine. But that sense of, being a part of their life and then being pulled away from it, I think it really bothers me. Mm-hmm. I'm happiest when the four of us are on a plane together.
Oh, so you will go down.
We all go down. But if it's just me,
My parents used to sometimes, they traveled a lot when my brother and I were growing up, and they would sometimes say to us, we've decided to take separate flights in case something happens. And whereas my brother and I wouldn't have been thinking before about the possibility of a plane crash, it left us then kind of terror-stricken twice. Like, okay, mom's taking off right now. Okay, dad's flying to London. It somehow made it worse. So maybe, have you voiced that idea of happiness to your kids? Do they know that you like being on a plane with them?
I think they can probably tell. Right. I'm much more relaxed if it's just the four of us.
Christine, what is the trait you most deplore in yourself?
Well, probably just what I described, my need for control. Total, complete control. I mean, in everything. So, having a dinner party or writing. I mean, I'm so ritualistic. I eat the same breakfast in the same place. When I'm writing, I eat the same breakfast, same place. I walk the same blocks. I sit in the same chair. I do everything in the most rigorous way, really disciplined. I write for the same amount of hours. I do not get up. There are no coffee breaks. There are no breaks for anything. And that to me is how it comes, is kind of to remove every single variable so that I can exist in my head. So that I like it. To me, it's almost superstitious that the imagination that it takes to write what I want to write can only exist in like this perfect equilibrium.
Yeah.
And so I have to remove everything, and then it comes, and it happens every time. So when you have like successful neuroses, it's sort of self-perpetuating.
Yeah, keep them exactly. Like the poet Rilke said. When Lou Andreas Salome said he may try psychoanalysis, and he did meet Freud once, and he said, I know it would probably clear out all my demons, but it will scare all the angels too.
Exactly.
So he said he would lose his inspiration. What is the trait you most deplore in others?
Oh, cruelty, and particularly violence. Any kind of, I have no threshold for any kind of brutality and violence, even in any direction.
Yeah.
And I think that takes a lot of forms. I mean, I think we're experiencing that now in a way that's very visceral, but I think we're also starting to understand how cruelty has existed in a much more subtle way through race in this country for hundreds of years.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I think that we all have a lot of learning to do about that and how that kind of more subtle and I don't know, that more subtle and invasive and pre-programmed and systematic kind of cruelty is almost worse than real physical violence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's more sinister.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's, you know, it often takes longer to discern, right?
Yeah.
That if it's kind of subtle and pernicious, it's harder to be on guard against it. It's harder to challenge it, I guess.
But it has equal intention often as someone, you know, hurting someone.
Right.
Yeah. Which living person do you most admire?
Most admire. You know who I really admire, and more than ever, is Steve Martin.
Oh, we haven't had that answer yet, but what a great one.
I know, I'm sure people pick someone like Obama or someone, but to me, he's just got everything. Like his whole understanding of who he is, what he can do. Like he understands his superpowers in a way that I really admire. He knows he can write, he knows he can make people laugh, but then he also stretches and he, you know, he has these quieter passions like art collecting that I really respect him for. He seems to me someone, I've never met him. I've been in the same room with him because he comes to the Met all the time. But he seems to be someone who really pursues both what he knows how to do and what he's curious about in kind of equal measure and just wrings the best out of life. He's someone who's done, I don't know, what he's done with his celebrity with real integrity, not necessarily saving the world, but being true to himself.
Yeah. Oh,
I watched his masterclass during quarantine.
Oh, was it about the banjo? What was it about?
No, it was about writing comedy.
Oh.
Yeah, and I love his passion for words and his understanding of structure and how that works even in a simple sentence. And I just love, he's a real word guy.
Yeah.
But he's also a closet art guy. I mean, he's got one of the greatest art collections in the world.
He has a great collection of Australian Aboriginal art.
Yes.
It's a really fantastic collection that was on view this last year, actually, at Gagosian. It's a really beautiful collection.
Yeah, he's an amazing guy. He's kind of a quiet Renaissance man.
Right. Yeah.
I hope he listens to this because I'd like to.
We'll send it to him. We'll be sure to send it to him.
Send him my book or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Always a good reason to send him your book. What is your greatest extravagance?
On a different level than Steve Martin, buying art.
Okay.
I am I believe that being a collector is a thing. Like it's something that's hardwired in you. It's an itch that needs to be scratched. It's quite addictive. And luckily I'm married to someone who shares it. We don't necessarily collect the same things, but we understand the passion for it. Both the connection to beauty or connection to objects, to things, but then also the desire to possess them. I have that in spades. And I think because I work at the museum, though, it means I don't want to own a Rembrandt. I don't want to, I actually don't want to own like a print of a Dürer. I don't want a kind of watered down version of a great master's work of art. So I like to collect like the best thing by an artist you've never heard of. I'm really interested in that. And I have very, very fast, very visceral responses to works of art. So when I want them badly. And so I buy a lot.
Yeah. Have you bought anything since lockdown began?
Literally 5 minutes ago, DHL came to the door.
Good.
Lockdown has been very fruitful for the collection. Yeah.
Yeah. A blessing and a curse. Can you tell us what it was that just arrived, or do you
A Swedish painting from London.
Okay.
And so it's funny because sometimes the DHL guy pulls up, and we're in the country, and so he pulls up, and my husband and I are kind of looking at one another like, is that you or me?
But it's also great to hear, because it's been so hard for artists, I think, that you're collecting now, because in this time.
Well, one of the things that's been amazing during the pandemic is this artist support pledge.
Yeah.
Where artists agree to sell their work at a certain price, and then once they, I think it's £250 in London, and then once they reach £1,000, they commit to buying a work of art from another artist. And so it's created this dynamic. Someone started it in the first week. And so I think it's been nice. A lot of the artists that we collect and that I know well from over the years, they've lost their day jobs. They don't, they're not teaching, and they're not they don't have the streams of income that they normally would. So it has been nice to collect that way. And it has felt like a small gesture to be able to do something.
Christine, what's your current state of mind?
Despite what's going on in the world, I think I'm rare in I'm very hopeful at the moment. Mainly because I think that things need to be broken before they can be fixed in some ways. That we're at this moment where it just seems so broken that it seems now possible to reimagine it. I think almost the extreme constraint of our dreadful president has actually just brought us to a point where it's like everything's intolerable. So and I hope that manifests itself in November, but so that now something else emerges. And I think often you have to reach that breaking point.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's kind of like when you're writing, and one of the best times I had in writing, I was going to the American Academy in Rome for a month. I had a sabbatical from the museum for a year. And in the month of November during that year, I was going to the American Academy in Rome. And just before that, my editor had read most of my manuscript. There were only a couple of chapters left, but and she just asked the most brutal questions of it. I mean, it was harsh in the best possible way. Yeah. And so I went to Rome and cloistered myself in this, essentially like this dorm room for a month to kind of address her questions, which mainly involved like throwing out most of what I'd written, a lot of what I wrote. And my legendary, I quote this to her all the time, and she's mortified by it, but it was the best edit I've ever had. And it should be like my screensaver. She wrote in the margin, "You must resist writing these extraordinarily beautiful passages that take us nowhere."
Oh.
And she was right, because I can write about the museum for days. I mean, I can take you through the Great Hall in 10 pages, 50 pages, whatever you want. And so it's almost too easy. And so to me, what was so satisfying about that is she, pointed to the problem in a kind of flashlight kind of way. But then my work was to actually have the courage to throw all those pages out and find that pruning that makes me so happy in their absence.
Yeah. Well, the result, it obviously worked, so we have no idea what ended up on the cutting.
I have a whole word file of the missing pages.
What do you consider the most overrated virtue?
This will be controversial, but I'll say it, especially because I'm here. Nature. Reverie in nature. It's so fucking over nature.
So you're not a Rousseau fan?
I'm just
romanticism.
I'm an urban creature, and I am like living the life of a country mouse, and I really struggle with that. I know it's beautiful, and I know it's a miracle, blah, blah, blah.
I love that, Christine, that you know it's beautiful. Like you've read about it.
Exactly.
Someone pointed that out to you. I'm glad someone pointed that out to you. So that's actually different from you.
I just don't, it's like all you can do is look at it, and it comes at you, and you say, that's amazing. I like a kind of, I like a bit of wrestling. I like a little hustle and bustle.
It's interesting what you're saying is the entire tradition is a kind of glorification, romanticization of nature. Behind it, the realization that nature is utterly indifferent and there's nothing.
Well, it's going to happen with or without you. And maybe that's like what I don't like about it, is that it's, and that's amazing and can be comforting for a lot of people that cycle of nature is always there. But like, I want something that distinctly doesn't happen automatically.
Yeah.
Like something that can be sort of, it can be bold, it can be delightful, it can be awful, it can be completely artificial, but it's like thrown at you with its expression. So something that's made by human expression. So something that, whether that's words or whether that's art, but something that comes from, talent and inspiration and, human hands.
Yeah.
And I think that's what gets my juices going much more than like a beautiful view ever would.
Yeah. There's a passage I just came across in Proust the other day in volume 5 where he's imagining, the narrator Marcel is imagining how he'd like to go to Venice one day. And he's thinking about how amazing it will be to see the city. And then he remembers that a sculptor he really admires has told him that basically the best thing about Venice are paintings of Venice. And it's just so much better to look at certain paintings of Venice than to actually go to the city. And and I think, and what Proust, the word that he uses somewhere in that kind of extended meditation on art versus nature is individuality, that, this expression, as you say, that you've got, it's, well, Monet is giving you a sunset, or Montaigne is giving you a scene in an amphitheater, or whatever it is, but that there's an individual kind of human spirit that's mediating between you and whatever natural world is finding its way in some way into what's represented.
I think you also just get hardwired as a New Yorker to kind of be in reception mode all the time and be like, and that cycle of responding. And so when you're in nature, it's just so one way. And I can't bear it.
I remember one of your posts on Instagram from the early days of the quarantine, and I forget even which image it was from the Met, but it was a picture of some artwork in the Met, and your caption said, "The art is there waiting for us." And I just thought, because I'm in the country too, and I thought, oh my God, there's a whole museum sitting empty that we could all just be in right now looking at it. But it's also comforting to think that the art is waiting for us. So the art is certainly waiting for you while you're exiled to nature.
It is. And I believe it misses me terribly.
On what occasion do you lie?
I lie to my children probably all the time, but I think where women are most compelled to lie is in the school mom context. Can you help with the Christmas fair? I'm never afraid to lie about that. So I do a lot of lying in that context. And I'm not afraid of protecting my beloved museum with some gentle fiction about what stories were true and what were not, and whose character was based on which person. No need.
Christine, what do you most dislike about your appearance?
Oh, I'd like to be taller.
Okay.
I'm classically known for wearing sky-high tall shoes. And if you could put me on a machine and stretch me and say, we'll just give you 4 more inches. I'm not short, but I just think there's incredible power in being tall. And so I just somehow constructed that instead of being that. But yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say I wouldn't have anticipated that because I think of you on these towering shoes all the time. And
right,
so,
I know. Because when you see me, I'm 5'11".
Right, that's what I am in flats. And Willie is we're what 6'7", 6'6",
6'6" or something. But actually, I think I was reading something about Oscar Wilde yesterday. I'm writing something in there that said he described somebody in vertiginous heels,
Yes.
which I really liked this kind of idea. So okay, real risk taking. That was funny.
Yeah.
Vertiginous heels. Yeah, at least what you dislike about your appearance is something that can be addressed with fabulous shoes.
I know, I'm lucky that way.
That is lucky.
That's right.
That is lucky. Which living person do you most despise?
The cop who was leaning on George Floyd's neck.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I can't even process that.
I know.
I can't. I could well up right now. I find that so.
Right.
Yeah. No, it's devastating.
It'll take the country and the world a long time to, and probably never to really grasp what that is, what that means to us.
Yeah.
To have witnessed that. Yeah. What is the quality?
How long it took. I think also how long it took.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't like watching an accident.
Right.
I think the slow, deliberate nature of it was particularly a kind of cruelty that I find almost incomprehensible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What is the quality you most like in a man?
Generosity. And I think that takes a lot of forms. I mean, I think that means being interested in other people, sort of generous in spirit, generous with their own achievements and curious about other people. I just find that more and more rare. I spent a lot of years sitting next to a lot of men at the Metropolitan Museum at a lot of dinners. And I can't say generosity was a very common trait. Maybe generosity to the museum. But that kind of generosity of spirit, which often I find that in being generous with your time, in listening, and being funny, I think is generous. Allowing you to be funny.
Yeah.
Allowing women to be funny too, and like taking that on. I think there's that's a generosity of spirit that I really love.
Right. Yeah.
What is the quality you most like in a woman?
Strength, bravery, the bravery to be strong, because I think that's still something we need to work on.
Mm-hmm.
And with that strength, I don't know. I think a lot of women don't feel the privilege to access their own imagination, and they're stuck in paradigms that are so useless. And so I think it demands bravery to ignore that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we're in New York, so we know a lot of people like that. It's rare, but I think women as a whole haven't gotten over that.
I really like this one, how you just said it, to be stuck in paradigms that are useless. And of course, it's hard because they're also comforting or stable or familiar.
Well, and they come from our own making.
Yeah.
And we usually say, Caroline always points this out, we take the questions that were posed in 1895, they're very gendered, probably don't apply today anymore. We wouldn't ask those. We would not create such questions today about. So it's
right. But then we have like Kim Kardashian in the world, and so maybe we should ask it, like how she uses that power as a woman in the world. No,
I think that's right, because I think the discussions that we're having now about racism also will need to be joined by more discussions about sexism and misogyny and how pervasive that is. And I think that, like Uli and I, our kind of politics and our view of, entities all along the kind of gender scale is such that it kind of feels offensive to differentiate in the question. But I think, as you point out, we still live in a world where there are very entrenched paradigms about what it means to be a woman or what it means to be a man. You know, a man maybe isn't supposed to be traditionally generous in the way that you just described. Right. And the kind of the obverse of that is women aren't encouraged to sort of show their strength in certain ways. So,
well, and I think within the art, you know, within women writers, women artists, I mean, that still sticks. Right. That, you know, that expectation, the way you're read, the way you're looked at, the way your art is looked at. I think there are different questions asked of women writers than they're asked of men.
Right.
So I think it's still around, even in that intellectual context.
My students are very, it's very easy for them. And I taught Virginia Woolf and Simone de Beauvoir and a couple of things and Toni Hurston 2 weeks ago. And they said, do you mean women or people who identify as women? And I said, oh, people who identify as women. And they said, oh, okay. And then they just moved right along. They had no problem at all understanding what that meant. They said, if you go through the world identifying as a woman, you're going to be treated as a woman. And the other debate they did not think was worthwhile having. So for them, it was really important. These categories totally structure the way people are treated in the world and how they act in the world, but it doesn't anchor it anymore for them in some biological category. It was really interesting. They were so easy with it. They said, oh, okay. And then they just moved along. They didn't want to stay with that part of the conversation. I thought that was very productive, I thought.
Yeah.
The kind of facility. Which words or phrases do you most overuse?
You know, I think when you write a book, you really learn what you overuse, because when you're proofreading it and going through it again and again and again, other people are too. I'll say the word that was repeated the most in my book, and I took a lot of them out, but I was struck by it, is tender.
Okay.
Tender and swagger, which actually sums up sort of the whole place. Right? The entire museum could actually be described with those two words.
In that sense, you did well to use them repeatedly, I suppose.
It's hard to come up with another word for swagger.
Or tender, really.
So yeah, I realized I repeat those all the time.
That is funny. What or who is the greatest love of your life?
I know I'm supposed to say my husband and my children, but I'm not going to. The greatest love of my life is the Met. And they would agree with that. Nothing has defined me, consumed me, affected me, nourished me like that museum. It's home, it's family, it's just it is the great love of my life, in the sense that it takes the whole span of my existence and marks it.
Christine, I don't know this, and I should know this. Do you remember the first time you went to the Met?
Oh, very early on. I was obsessed with the, there's a medieval reliquary that J.P. Morgan gave the Met. And it's it looks like a sort of big trophy, but in the middle of it is this piece of rock crystal. And then embedded in that rock crystal is a big molar, like a huge tooth. And it was supposed to be Mary Magdalene's tooth. It was just like which I think is the greatest display of faith, the fact that anyone would believe that was Mary Magdalene's tooth. And there's actually a letter in the file that says it's actually the tooth of a pig. But I would go visit that thing. I love that thing in a way that's just irrational for an atheist, but I just loved it. I think to me it was like a really great crafts project. Like a great school project. Right. It's just old. But the first time that I ever got behind the ropes was I was an intern at the Met after college. So between college and graduate school. Mm-hmm. And that was the first time that I got to go through the doors and go back into the kind of gray areas of the Met and the offices and the behind the scenes stuff and in the basement. And that was like, chugging the Kool-Aid, like, I want in, this is it. And these are my people and this is where I belong. So after graduate school, I went back.
Right.
I'm trying to remember, does the molar in rock crystal make an appearance in Metropolitan Stories?
In Night Moves, Henry Radish, the guard, swings by, looks at the molar, and gets a toothache because Henry has that. He has that very visceral relationship with the works of art, so he has to move on because it makes his toothache.
When and where were you happiest?
Oh, I can answer that almost to the minute. October 28th, 2005, about 3:45 in Venice, getting into the gondola to go get married.
Oh, you got married in Venice?
I got married in Venice, and I was so, this is, I think, quite rare. I was so aware in that moment that feeling was something distinctive and so powerful. And I was so absorbing it in a very conscious way that's, I think, unusual for me and for anyone. But I remember walking down that dock being like, this is the happiest I'll ever be. That's it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great. Which talent would you most like to have?
Better at foreign languages.
Okay.
Like I've got, French and Spanish and German, all equally mediocre. Love to speak Italian. If there was one like pill I could take with some, mild side effect, that suddenly I'd just be fluent and because I'm the person who like goes to a country and then pretends to speak the language because it's just fun.
Sure. It's always more fun to do, especially in Italy.
I just like to do it. And I think it's a sign of respect to give it a shot.
Sure.
And depending on where you are, they're more or less receptive to it, but I like to give it a go.
Yeah.
And, I have the worst trait though. I have pretty decent accents. And so I'll deliver some line really well. And the expectation is I can handle the answer.
Right.
And so then, all this German comes flying my way and I'm completely lost. The whole charade is over.
I have that in Sweden where I don't speak a lick of Swedish, but just because of the way I look, people, I've spent my whole life in France and in French culture. And before I ever open my mouth in France, somebody will try speaking to me in English or German and in Sweden, I don't, apart from hey, which is hello, I don't know any Swedish, and everywhere I go, less so even than in Germany, Uli. But Uli, do you get that in Scandinavia at all too, or?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And the people assume that I would know something in the language. Yeah, but I do the same thing that you do. I just speak whatever 2 words I know.
Yeah.
But then, like half of it, you can fake it. You can sort of, if your timing is good. Like I've had whole dinner parties in Tel Aviv where someone said, "Oh my God, your Hebrew is perfect," and I was like, "Ken," and I would say Ken, and then I would just look at them and say like Ken, and then be like, "Wow," and I had no idea. I just laughed at the right moment, and I said my one word at the right moment, and since I said the right word, it was sort of this kind of gimmick.
I've had that dinner party in English. If people just if you just sit there and nod at the right time, people think you're amazing.
Yeah.
If you could change one thing about yourself, what would it be?
I think it wouldn't kill me to loosen up a bit on the control thing. I have no sense of adventure, none whatsoever. I have no desire to travel to a really risky place and my definition of risky is like India. I mean, like a place that's so steeped in a completely different set of rhythms. Mm-hmm. And I almost think if I went to India because of the, I get super nervous in crowds. So not my country. But almost the change of palette and the intensity of what comes at you in a place like that. I'm not sure I could handle it. So I think it would probably serve me to have a more adventurous spirit. But I don't know, at 50, I'm not sure that's going to happen.
What do you consider your greatest achievement?
The book.
Yeah.
My novel. Yeah.
Well, and
I think because it took, I thought about that book for 23 years before I sat down to write it. And it represents so much of me, both as a person, but also telling that story from that perspective and in that time. The whole book takes place when I'm young. I'm in my 20s. I don't know anything. And it's a world that's occupied by these very larger than life characters who used to run the Met, who are no longer there. And the spirit of the place was very familial and very, very eccentric, arrogant, yes, but also eccentric and quite, quite small in a way. And so the overwhelming thing I hear from colleagues who have read it is that they're just glad I wrote it down.
Nice.
That while the book is the book, and whether they like it or not, they just like that I did the work to capture that time and that place and the way that it was, because it can't still be there. So many of those people have changed. So I think for my own sake, I was glad I did that. But it's also nice to hear from people who shared that experience, that they are grateful for the words.
Yeah. Well, and also, I'm glad that you talked about the fact, so you and I did a book talk for your book at the 92nd Street Y a while ago. And I remember kind of seeing a little bit, just a glimmer of excitement go through the audience when you mentioned that you'd been thinking about the book for 23 years before you wrote it. And I think that's very inspiring to people who might be nursing some kind of project too, but because they're busy with their day job, because life gets in the way, might not think it would be possible to do. And it's amazing that you did it. I mean, you worked very hard at the Met. You had a number of different functions. You could have easily, from what I gather, just spent the rest of your life moving from one kind of area of the Met to another and doing that kind of work. So the idea that you were actually able to take time out and create this book that you've been living with for so long is really
there's also that thing, and I think it's very real. At that point, when I sat down to write it, like, it had gotten to the point where I had to get it out. Like, it was, it existed in my head, and quite happily, I didn't take notes. I didn't keep journals. My favorite part of our talk, actually, when we did that talk at the 92nd Street Y, there was a point at which I said that somebody asked, and I said I didn't take any notes, and I kept it in my head for 23 years. And you said, oh, just like Proust. I felt like I should have just dropped the mic and walked away right there. I should have stopped the book tour. It's like,
exactly.
But it's true. And I'm so predictable that I was just about to remind us of that again. Proust did not take notes. He lived with that book in his head.
But I think there's also this time, and I don't know if, Proust shared this, but there is a moment where, it's in you, and you do have to write, you have to, by some force. I'm not sure I could have gone on without writing it. It was so ready, which is the reason I was able to write it in a year, is because it was just it was bubbling over.
Yeah.
Right.
And I needed to write it. And so I think a lot of art comes from that same place.
Yeah.
If you were to die and come back as a person or a thing, what or who would it be?
Easy. An object in the Met's collection. I'd be back home. I'd be brilliantly cared for.
And which one? I mean, because that's one of the many wonderful things about your book, is the fact that the objects have lives and have perspectives in the story. Is there one in particular? Would you be that fauteuil?
Well, and that's the thing about, I know that armchair I write, the second chapter of the book is from the perspective of that 18th century chair. But, that's a bittersweet situation, because that chair longs to be sat in.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's a little, so I do have this idea that an object landing in the Met, while it's sort of the ultimate achievement, it's also kind of this bittersweet thing, in that no one will touch you ever again. And that there is a kind of being on display that changes the life of an object. And I wonder sometimes how the objects themselves feel about that.
It's like Walter Benjamin's concept of aura has this kind of melancholic idea that once things have been taken out of their context, which is they were all sacred in some way, even art sort of had this function for us, but then it's taken out of a household, a family, a community, into a museum. It's wonderful because we all have access, but it loses this aura of having this deep personal embeddedness in life.
Yes.
He always feels there's a kind of tension because he actually, I think, criticism where you're writing, someone like Benjamin would say, it restores this aura. It gives life back through the gaze of the beholder who actually endows it with another kind of life.
Yes, and I think that those works of art are also kind of witnesses to history, and so when they're in their context, all kinds of stuff is going on. And so, I was trying to capture what that chair may have seen in those hundreds of years, and I think when we limit the frame so much in the context of a gallery, what it sees is this parade of people, but that's not quite the reality of life and the texture and substance of what it would be in its original context. So yes, it's a mixed blessing, but a blessing I would happily endure for. It's a nice retirement home.
Right.
Where would you most like to live?
Well, as we talked about, I mean, I'm not capable of living in anywhere but a city, it's kind of non-negotiable that I live in New York. But I do. I mean, if we're talking about kind of a real estate envy situation, I've always looked at that little apartment that's right across the street, across the square, the piazza from the Pantheon. Laundry hanging out, and there's I just can't even imagine waking up every day and that's right there, neighbor to the Pantheon. So New York, absolutely. But in my fantasy life, I have that apartment across from the Pantheon.
Nice. What is your most treasured possession?
An object?
Yes.
Oh God. I think my engagement ring, which people won't be able to see on the podcast, but it's this.
Wow.
I wear it on my index finger of my left hand, and it's a very large cabochon ruby, and it was made by a great friend of my husband's called James de Givenchy, and he is an incredible jeweler. And before we had any, we weren't really talking about getting married, but I met with James with the sense that this was the meeting I was to have about this ring. And I decided I didn't really want to have a meeting about this ring. So I showed up and I gave him, there was an exhibition in 1997, I think, at the Met called The Glory of Byzantium. And it has like one of the biggest catalogs we've ever published. It was 750 pages, this giant thing, gorgeous thing. And we sat down and I just pulled this thing out, this massive book, and it just plunked on the table. And I just pushed it toward him and I said, "This is everything you need to know." And he created me this amazing Byzantine ring. Wow. And it means a lot to me because of the creative spirit behind it, but also my husband was so proud of it and so engaged with it in a way that very much spoke to who he is as a person, as a collector, as a kind of person interested in things and beauty and history. And still to this day, when I see the curator of that exhibition, she still grabs my finger and says, like, "How's it doing?" Because she takes full responsibility.
Nice.
Yeah, but I think it's like the source of all my power comes from that ring. And it weighs a lot. So you get very used to having this sort of physical connection to the weight of it in your daily movements. And so I think I'd feel quite lost without that sensation.
What do you regard as the lowest depth of misery?
The suburbs.
What is your favorite occupation?
I think I've been very lucky that I've had my favorite occupations, in the sense that, as an art historian who was destined to become a failed curator, I knew I didn't have what it took to be. I was a terrible academic, terrible. Like, I was so lucky to go to graduate school in the time of theory, because all you had to do is be able to write. And so you just had to have the ideas, and you have to just be able to like manipulate the language. But I was a terrible researcher, completely this is probably why I'm writing fiction, totally uninterested in understanding whether this spoon was owned by Marie Antoinette or not by looking at some inventory. So I never had that drive, but I had the passion for the objects, and I had the connection to the museum that was so almost religious. And so, I got that. And then I got to transition that into the second act of being a writer and making that kind of my next phase. And so it's been very seamless.
What is your most marked characteristic?
Candor. When I was at the Met, I used to do all these informational interviews, which were usually, people interested in museum careers and stuff, and then like children of donors and stuff, and they would come in and they would ask me all these questions, and I would be very straightforward with them about what it takes. And I was very lucky, because I began my career at the Met first as an intern, but then as an assistant. And I was the lowest of the low. I mean, I got coffee, and it was the pre-email world. I delivered mail. I made copies. It was very, it was super grunt work. I, did filing, and I learned everything doing those jobs. So when I was very senior, that was the work that was actually informing what I did and the decisions I was making. And so I would usually give young people speeches about that. And then inevitably, within 3 days, I would get what we called, my assistants would collect them, I appreciate your candor thank you note.
That's right.
And so we had this very substantial collection of appreciate your candor correspondence.
What do you most value in your friends?
I think compassion, humor, the ability to, take my candor and know what to do with it.
That's nice. Yeah.
Who are your favorite writers?
Oh, my boys. Fitzgerald, Cheever, Graham Greene. Those are the, those are the people I read to learn how to write. Mm. I mean, that's who I went back to again and again and again. And I had, like affairs with Julian Barnes and Martin Amis and those boys too. But to me, if I need to be replenished, it's Fitzgerald, Cheever. Mm-hmm. And I think that that kind of magic somehow embeds in you in a way that affects you in some, not in a direct way. It can't even come close to write the way they do, but it's important. It's important to absorb that in some fundamental way. And I think the rereading things does that.
Oh yeah. I mean, The Great Gatsby, I could and do reread that book at least once a year. I mean, it's a perfect book.
And there's so much there. And you just, and you read one of those perfect sentences, where we started, and you just think, God, I feel like I've never read that before. Right. And it's just heaven. And so I think that kind of writing, when it's that good, it just rewards you again and again and again. I've been reading John O'Hara short stories, which I haven't read for a very long time, but he's extraordinary in his constraints. He uses no metaphors, no similes whatsoever. And so what he can eke out of straightforward description without using that crutch, stunning.
Amazing. Yeah. Virginia Woolf has this really funny sentence she says about the Brontes. I think they write sentences that can last you through the Christmas holiday. And it's other things you read, and then the term is over, and you go home, and you're thinking, "Oh my God, my life back with the family with no nourishment." But one sentence sticks with you, and I love that a sentence could last through this desert period where being
Yeah.
I really love this. I always feel like to write a sentence that could last through the Christmas holidays is an achievement.
Totally, like quietly feeding you.
Exactly.
Yeah. Love that.
That's good. I would like to write a sentence like that, though. Like to be Virginia Woolf saying that about the Brontes.
Totally. Yeah. I think she fully knew that sentence itself would last much longer.
Totally.
It's going to last us now through the rest of the pandemic, no matter how long that is.
Exactly.
Chris, who is your hero or heroine of fiction, TV, film? Who is your favorite invented character?
I think this is an incredibly hard question. Certainly the favorite character I've ever written is that chair we talked about.
I love the chair.
I love the chair. And as someone who I used to visit the chair all the time. And so I was glad to give it life. But, there's another, one of the things when you have kids, you read them the same book over and over again. So the same way we read Fitzgerald, when you land on the great children's books, you read them again and again and again. And literally in the same night, you'll read the same book 4 times. And there was a book called something like When the Babies Crawled Away. Something like that. I think it's this woman named Rathbone, or I don't remember. And in it's a story told completely in silhouette. And it's about this families who have this picnic and they're eating pies or whatever, and the babies all crawl away. And the story is told very visually because it's all these silhouettes. And you see these babies and they're all over the place. And, the children thought it was hilarious. But what I loved is that all the babies kind of stick together and they're all going in one direction. And on every single page, one baby hangs upside down. No matter what everybody else is doing,
Possum baby
is just like, she finds a place to hang upside down and just sort of see the whole thing differently. And to me, that baby is like, that's sort of how I feel. I remember trying to explain this to them. Like, it's good to go with the pack and you have your friends, but like, don't be afraid to like see everything a totally different way. And like, you're not abandoning them and you're still safe and whatever, but like, you should hang upside down every once in a while. And I feel like, that if there's anything about the book that is, it's like I was going through this process with a lot of people. The Met has a staff of 2,200 people, but every once in a while I would hang upside down and hear the chair talking. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's just a matter of like looking at life through a slightly different lens.
Yeah.
Which historical figure do you most identify with? A real person?
I would like to identify with, or I aspire to identify with, Gertrude Stein.
Oh.
I like the idea of a kind of a creative life within creative lives. Mm-hmm. I like the idea of feeding off of people, of reading their manuscripts. I mean, I'm not Gertrude Stein, but I like that community she created. I like that sense of a salon of people gathering, of people, and everyone kind of trying and failing together, and the energy that connects with. And I think that's, we're lucky. We're in New York and we get that. We get that kind of community. That artistic community is really important to me. And I think that's where, when we talk about the qualities in our friends and sort of like, that compassion for the work, that compassion for the effort and for the risk that's involved in that, is just as important as, what's happening in your private life, or, I always admire that. And I know it's probably greatly glossed over, but that world she created was extraordinary.
I mean, we say this, like I say this with all the humility, but I think we started doing this podcast because it's so amazing to talk to people who are using their imagination and to actually follow the way they're doing it, which is not how Carol and I would do it. I think this is the only way to sort of learn to be in the world in a more expansive way. I don't believe that art teaches you morality or empathy, but to be around people who use their imagination in ways like the upside down baby
Right.
in a different way.
Yeah.
Is
I think you're Gertrude Steining.
Yeah, we're trying. She's a little forbidding. I don't know. She always seems like in these portraits, she seems kind of stern.
Yeah.
No, but I like the idea that people, they trusted her.
Yeah.
They trusted her to read the work, to respond to the work, and then they trusted her responses. I mean, that's a great thing.
Right.
Yeah. No, and it is such a nice complement with an E to a creative life where, the writing process is ultimately a solitary one. So to be able to kind of come out of your writing and be in community with people who can inspire you, who can edit you, who can criticize you, who can push you in new directions. It's
my most important people when I was writing were my readers. And you send them pages, and they were allowed to choose when I sent the things, but they only had 24 hours to get back to me because I couldn't take it. I couldn't take the lack, and it was usually only, 10 pages or something, but they were so important to me to keep me going and to give me reassurance, no matter what they thought, that there was something there.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're right. It's a very isolated pursuit.
Who are your heroes in real life?
Philippe de Montebello, hands down.
Okay. Former director of the Met.
Director of the Met for 31 years. And I just, and I don't think we knew what we had when we had it other than we adored him.
We being the other people at the Met?
Yeah. He was an extraordinary leader and a tremendous person who, when I was the lowest person there and I was, sitting in the room, taking notes or whatever, I knew exactly what he wanted from me in terms of standards of excellence and devotion to that place and the sort of importance of the entire endeavor. The whole mission of that place was so clear with him, and he had a way of making you, he was so intimidating, absolutely a frightening human being, still is, but he had a way of making you understand that you had a role to play within this big musical production that we were involved in every day. And I think that's an extraordinary thing. I really do. I think he was exceptional. I don't think we understood it until he wasn't there, but I will always be grateful for that experience, just proximity to him.
What are your favorite names?
Favorite names. One of the things I had the hardest time with, when you write fiction, you have to come up with names, and it's really hard. And I really struggled with it. In the book, there's a chapter about the guys who changed the light bulbs in the Met, and I was just at a loss for names. So I looked at the collection website, and I looked for artists that weren't on view, because I thought the light bulb guys are people who you never see. And so they all have names of artists who are not on view. So I do love the star of that chapter is a guy called Moody Russell, which is actually the name of an artist who's not on view in the American collection. Moody Russell. And I do have an affection for Henry Radish, who was the guard on the night shift in the book. But the thing, it's funny, now I hear names everywhere. My son and I were just walking down the street, and he was explaining to me about this style of car in which the tires, the wheels stick out of the car, and it's called I think it's called a Poke Fitman. And I was like, Poke Fitman would be a great character. So now I feel like they're just sort of everywhere, I've always loved the name Slim Keith, that great socialite from the...
Oh, yeah. It's a great name.
I mean, it's a fantastic name. So I think that, I don't have favorite names, except I have experience with names that have then they just have this eclat.
Yeah. No, Slim Keith really is. I love Slim Keith because she remained Slim Keith even after she was no longer slim. Like she didn't stay skinny her whole life, but you've got the name Slim Keith and you actually don't even need to be skinny. And it doesn't matter. Yeah.
And Keith is the most banal name. So
I know.
Slim Keith, just getting it done with Slim Keith. I mean, respect.
Slim Keith. What is it that you most dislike? Just in general, in particular?
In general. I think it's violence.
Yeah.
I have no tolerance for violence. I can't even watch, I couldn't watch Breaking Bad, which was supposed to be the greatest show ever made. Couldn't watch it. It's too violent. I just can't handle it. I can't handle seeing human beings hurt other human beings.
Yeah.
I'm not like a, what's his name? Quentin Tarantino. Not my thing.
What is your greatest regret?
My greatest regret is another Met story. There was a guard at the Met who was like the mayor of the Met. He had been there for, I think, 41 years. His name was Dave, and he, you'd see him all the time. And one morning I saw him. I was on sabbatical, and I had come through the museum, and I saw him. Actually, I think I was done with sabbatical, but I was walking through the museum before it was open to the public. And I always walked through the 18th century galleries, and I saw him there. And there was this rope, and he went and he stepped right over it. And then he held it for me. He pulled the rope back and he held it for me. I said, "Thanks, Dave." And he said, when I was young, I used to jump right over that rope with 2 feet. And he says, and I said, "That's amazing." And he said, "Oh, I like to take care of myself." And he walked me. He would walk you places. He would, no matter where you were going. And often I would be delivering the mail when I was young. And he remembered the first day I ever worked there. And so this is, 24 years later, and he's walked me to the elevator. And I was just about to tell him about, he's a character in the book, and he is this guy who appears as this sort of occasionally just this wise figure who's sort of truth teller. And I was about to tell him because he asked me how the book was going, and I didn't. I thought, no, I should let him read it, and then he'll be surprised. And that afternoon, he died in the galleries of a heart attack. And I felt like I just missed this moment to tell him how loved he was, and how, if I had done it, I don't know, I think I would have felt a little more. I mean, his death was a shock, but maybe I would have felt like I had a moment with him.
Yeah.
For that. I've always regretted that. He's missed every day in that place.
How would you like to die?
I'd like to die in a kind of Stendhal way, just overwhelmed by beauty and just consumed by it. So I imagine that's where that is.
I think that's called Death in Venice.
Yeah, well, it probably is in Venice, right? I mean, it's maybe.
He's eating strawberries on the beach and looking at something beautiful.
Yeah. Maybe I'm in a palazzo, not the beach. I have a thing about sand. Can't control sand. So
yeah, nature again.
Nature again. Damn nature again. So yeah, no, I'm in a palazzo, probably, go on my way to go to sleep or something. But yeah, I love the idea of being so overwhelmed that you can't even process it. You have to just remove yourself from it.
The sublime, yeah. That's the ultimate sublime. Or it's actually, I think it's Death in Venice, or it's Jodie Foster in Contact or something. It's one of those cosmic movies where they just become part of space. The other one, it's you just
you're absorbed into it all. Yeah. It's sort of the inverse, right, of the Oscar Wilde dying and complaining about the ugly wallpaper. right?
That's right.
Right. I mean, that would be
Maybe
different. I mean, that would be like, the worst death. That would happen in the suburbs. That's where the ugly wallpaper is.
But it could not happen in nature. Nature doesn't have that going for it.
Yeah, I think Oscar Wilde felt like he loved France, but he still felt he was exiled to the proverbial suburbs. When he had to leave England after the trial and after his imprisonment, I think you're right. He didn't die of beauty.
Yeah. No, it was the squalor of that hotel.
Wallpaper, right. Yeah. What is your motto?
My motto is a motto that I stole unabashedly. It's Merce Cunningham, and it used to be, well, I'm sure it still is on the wall of there's a great curator of performance art at the Met called Limor Tomer, and she has this on her wall. And to me, it has become my motto, which is the only way to do it is to do it.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
And I think that can actually propel you very often, like at a moment of just hesitation or whatever. I mean, I use it on my sons all the time about like taking the garbage out or whatever. But it's also this thing of like, you can't conceive of it until you do it. And so what you're trying for, you don't even know until you do it. And so I think in writing, you just got to start typing.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Say it again, the motto.
The only way to do it is to do it.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's so much better than like, it's not going to write itself, which I sometimes say to myself, looking at the blank page on my computer screen. No, the only way to do it is to do it.
But it's like you've imagined it like, well, what if they did this? And what if it was, what? And you can imagine in the world of dance, it's just like, well, what if they were flying across the stage or whatever? It's just like, well, we can't do that. Like, because so much the answer in the world that comes back at you is you can't do that. You can't have the chair talk, whatever you're imagining, what usually you feel is the negative, like, well, there's a reason no one's done that before, and so you do land to this point where the only way to do it is to just, well, let me show you how it could be done.
Right.
Let me show you what that would look like. And I think it's so, it's kind of lofty, but pragmatic.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think I'm going to throw that one away. That's wonderful. Okay. We've added one question to this questionnaire, which wasn't on the original. Who would you most like to hear answer the questions of this questionnaire on this podcast? And it would ideally be a person who's alive, because we'd like maybe potentially to be able to interview that person.
Steve Martin.
Oh, all right. Yes.
He'd be a great person.
He'd be a fantastic guest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why not? We'll send him the audio file of your interview, and we'll say, on the strength of Christine Coulson's recommendation, you've come to our attention.
Exactly. Yeah, you've come to our attention.
You've come to our attention. That's great.
We understand you're good with words.
But Caroline kind of preempted it because I really wanted you to recommend an armchair from the Met.
Oh, yeah.
Like I really wanted 35 questions for this armchair.
God, we could do it. The only way to do it is to do it.
Oh my God, let's do it. I mean, Uli and I have talked about the fact that we have so much fun with the people we interview, and at the end of it, there is a kind of a feeling like the person better, but then what do you do with that? Because then we're all just back in lockdown again. Maybe we could revisit this questionnaire, a year from now, where, if you're kind of nostalgic for your chair, we could just have you do the 35 questions as that chair.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Steve Martin does not preclude that conversation.
That's right. But also what you said earlier, how much writing goes into the book, and then your editor said throw out everything that doesn't advance you. So there's a lot of research that goes into a very small chapter. There's an enormous amount of knowledge that becomes a half a sentence. So I think it would be fun for you to answer all the other questions. It's
backstory.
That's right.
Yeah. I think that's true. I mean, you can't, everyone always asks who the people in the book are, trying to tie them to real people. And the truth is, they often start with the traits of a real person, but then you have to possess them. Like, you actually have to give them a backstory so that they become characters, because I can't answer the questions that I need to answer with the real people. So you've got to make some stuff up. And so you wind up doing that, giving them that, so that you get the right voice. And I did a whole chapter that is clearly based on the spirit of Philippe de Montebello. But where that goes, I can assure you, I did not have conversations like that with Philippe de Montebello. So it has to become its own thing. You have to be able to kind of capture someone else's perspective and think about how they would answer questions like this in order to write dialogue for them, in order to understand their point of view.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to say to our listeners, we will release this. We will undoubtedly still be in some kind of lockdown around the world. But your book, Metropolitan Stories, I think is a wonderful book to read right now, to let all these works come to life that we can't visit right now. So I think a lot of people are really, really deprived of this kind of experience. So your book is a really incredible book, I think, especially at this time when you can't see the works themselves, to actually just spend time with them, because you bring them to life in such a beautiful
Well,
way.
and a lot of it takes place when no one else is around. So I think it's a lot about that side of the museum that people don't see. So, and that life that exists there. And sadly, even that life has been shut down at the museum. But that idea and thinking about those objects in that building right now and what they're experiencing. But then I take a very broad view of that. I mean, those objects have survived so much in the course of their existence, and I talk a little bit about that, about this idea of survival and what that means. And so to them, this is probably like a blip,
Right.
If you think of what they've been through and what they've seen and witnessed, and this is probably a little disturbing because it kind of reminds them of storage a little bit, which to me, in my mind, like the worst kind of purgatory for a work of art is storage. It could be nothing more frightening, because you don't know if you're getting out of storage, how long you'll be in storage. Nothing good comes from storage. So right now they might be having some flashbacks to storage because there's no one around. But
I was wondering, because did you read The Hair with the Amber Eyes, the Edmund de Waal book?
Yeah.
Yeah, which is sort of one of those books that gives an object this whole history, and it's about survival and sort of living through this catastrophe and
very
trauma.
much so.
Yeah,
Yep.
It's quite beautiful. I love that book, actually.
Yeah. We should invite him too, Uli.
That's a good idea.
Wonderful man, really a wonderful man.
Yeah, he would be a great person. I think that is actually that book and your book. It also opens up the world of art, which can look, as you said, intimidating, arrogant, this kind of fortress. But I think there's life in these objects.
Yes, and I think the idea that I think a lot of people feel when they go to the Met that they don't know what they're supposed to know to understand it, and I think. I hope that people feel a little liberated from that you actually don't need to know anything. The object tells you what you need to know. You need to be able to slow down and actually look. And in the looking, you'll find everything you need to know. But I think people feel like everybody else around them knows what they're doing except for them. There's that vibe in museums, and then everyone's doing the kind of label reading shuffle. And so I think, I hope that the way that I talk about works of art actually allows people to just not worry about that so much, and have a much more quiet and, my advice always to people is to go to the Met, walk through the galleries, just wander through and find something that stops them in their tracks, and then look at that thing for 15 minutes. Which is a long time to look at a work of art. The average person looks at it like for 6 seconds and then leave. It's the most important thing they can do. And like that Virginia Woolf sentence, that'll stay with you through Christmas. that object, that process of looking that deeply and then walking away and not allowing anything else to clutter that, you'll never lose that object. It will stay with you, partially because you selected it, but also then you took the time to have an experience with it, and then you just didn't let anything else come into it. I think it can be very powerful, and then I think you kind of own that thing.
Right, but it's a nice approach to say allow an object to also select you.
Right.
Stop you in your tracks while you think you have to do this, you have to do this. You say, if the second thing you see you like, that means it speaks to you, let it speak to you. And
it's not because it's important. It's not because it was, the gallery that has that chair in it, that chair is kind of off to the side, and, it's this very glittering 18th century salon, and it's, that chair is competing with Marie Antoinette's dog bed. So, it's
personal favorite of mine. Yeah.
But I mean, so it's not always the thing that gets you going is not always the thing that historically or art historically curatorially is the most important thing. And so I think you should allow yourself that for whatever reason, it's just a kind of dating. You just have to find the thing that gets you going. And then that's perfectly valid to sit with that for a while. And then you sort of understand why you like it. And I think that act of looking, no one teaches people to do that, to kind of look at the edges and sort of ask questions of a work of art. We forget to explain that to people. Instead, we like to tell them where it was made and how it was made and who made it and where it was. And those are all important things. And that scholarship is very critical to understanding the object. But that initial connection should come first.
I always thought about this. Caroline and I have talked about this. We teach literature, we study literature in college and graduate school. This initial wounding of being spoken to by a text, when you read something and it pricks you, or there's something that stays with you, that a lot of scholarship actually buries or doesn't really acknowledge, to say, why did this text speak to you in the beginning, in the first time? And then you try to do all this work and you're learning an enormous amount, and you may actually learn that you misunderstood something even, but something in there spoke to you. And so I think this is really important to preserve that for people. But I love this hour, Christine. I really feel like it was like the nicest hour I've spent this week. I feel like I was in the museum with you.
You and me both. Absolutely.
It's so nice.
I've completely forgotten about nature.
Well, if we could do at least that for you during this hour, then more power to all of us. That's great. Well, no, it's been wonderful. And it really, like your book, you've brought us into a richer world. And it was a treat and a privilege. So thank you for doing this. And
I love that you're doing this. It's a great idea.
Thank you so much.
And come back as the chair. We want the chair's answers.
Back as the chair.
The chair craving, the child crawling on the arm. I mean,
Easy. I can give you, exactly. I have the answers right away. I mean.
Oh my God. Yeah. No, we'll definitely do an episode with the chair. Uli discouraged me. I have 4 dogs, and I wanted to do this questionnaire from the point of view of each of my 4 dogs, but that's 4 hours that nobody but me would care about. And yet
we'll break the ice with the chair. We'll break the ice with the chair, and then you can move to the dog.
I think the chair is a better candidate. Anyway, thank you very much, Christine. Stay well.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.